I believe we are in crisis. The distance between what is said and what is known to be true has become an abyss. Of all the things at risk, the loss of an objective reality is perhaps the most dangerous. The death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil. When truth leaves us, when we let it slip away, when it is ripped from our hands, we become vulnerable to the appetite of whatever monster screams the loudest. That is an incredibly powerful statement, one that resonates with what we are experiencing in the real world today. So that statement really struck a chord with me personally, because it felt like it's exactly the kind of statement that people need to hear right now. And it's hard to believe that that profoundly relevant statement was made in a Star Wars series of all places. I mean, Star Wars has always been based on real-world events. The original two films were obviously inspired by World War II and Nazi Germany's rise to power. Return of the Jedi was clearly inspired by America's failures during Vietnam. Revenge of the Sith was a strong political statement opposing the Bush administration and their stance on the Iraq War. But for whatever reason, it seems like people have forgotten about how political Star Wars has actually been over the years. And I'm glad that for the first time in a long time, it feels like Star Wars actually has something to say again. I don't care how many people cry about its wokeness or about its potential political agenda. I personally couldn't be happier about how socially relevant Andor feels. But let's talk about what happens in the episodes. Episode 7 begins by showing us that Cassian and Bix are currently living on Yavin 4, where the rebels have begun coordinating their military operations. And I loved seeing this side of Yavin, especially considering how the rebels were operating just a few years beforehand. It's cool to see how everything is forming and starting to come together. So Wilman arrives and tells Cassian that Dedra is on Gorman, encouraging Cassian to help assassinate her. Cassian doesn't want to, however, given how the mission has come from Luthen, and their relationship has become a bit strained over the years. But when Bix has a Force user help heal some of Cassian's wounds, they're informed that Cassian will be a vital part to the rebellion. And I honestly loved seeing the Force being used this way. Cassian isn't important because he has a high midichlorian count, or because he's related to somebody significant, but because of his character. His drive to move forward is his most valuable asset to the rebellion. So, despite his concerns over the mission, Cassian agrees to travel with Wilman to Gorman. When he arrives, Imperial officers begin to close off a town square where peaceful protesters have gathered to voice their anger against the Empire. Not only that, but they intentionally deploy inexperienced riot police into the volatile crowd, setting up for a sequence that is incredibly tense and suspenseful. It honestly felt like I was watching a World War II documentary or something. Like real footage from the Nazi occupation of France or something. It was truly unsettling. Even Cyril realizes how fucked up the whole situation has become, and after violently confronting Dedra about it, his guilt over enabling the Empire causes him to storm out into the crowd. Unfortunately for him, that's not the best place for anyone to be right now. Because after the troops are given their orders, an Imperial sniper kills one of his own men, which incites a violent and chaotic riot, meaning that this entire situation was a false flag operation meant to make the peaceful people of Gorman to seem like a rebellious threat to the Empire. And even though a shootout does erupt between the Imperials and some of the protesters, the events that transpire here are nothing short of genocide. The Gorman people are being slaughtered and massacred. Also, the Empire can strip the planet for its resources, consequences. It's fucking heartbreaking. And it's made even worse when KX droids are released onto the streets, because those motherfuckers are terrifying, feeling like they were ripped straight out of a Terminator film or something. But Terminators haven't been this scary since 1984. Regardless, Cassian attempts to assassinate Dedra throughout all of the chaos when he's suddenly ambushed by a dazed Cyril. A fight quickly ensues, and it ends with Cyril actually getting the upper hand. But when Cassian asks, "Who are you?" Cyril has something of a brief existential crisis. All Cyril ever wanted to be was someone of importance, and everything he ever did led up to him being part of this historic moment. Yet, nobody knows who he is, and nobody will ever know who he is because he's killed before he gets the chance to kill Cassian himself. So there's a sad irony in knowing that the last words he ever heard were, "Who are you?" It almost makes me feel bad for the poor bastard. Kudos to the show for making me feel sympathy for one of the worst characters in the entire galaxy. And the same goes for Dedra, since she starts having a bit of a panic attack after the massacre. I guess she wasn't ready to be complicit in mass genocide. She thought she was going to be remembered as a hero, and even though the Empire is going to try and spin the events of the massacre, that doesn't change the fact that Dedra probably doesn't feel like a hero. But before the episode is over, the Resistance manages to incapacitate a KX droid by ramming it into an armored transport. Cassian then escapes Gorman with the droid, while Willman stays to find his girlfriend Drina, who has been broadcasting news of the massacre to anyone in the galaxy who is willing to listen. And for how absolutely outstanding this episode really was, which is probably one of the best pieces of Star Wars content ever, I actually like episode 9 even better. Because in the aftermath of the Gorman massacre, the Empire tries to frame the incident as an insurrection, but not everyone believes in that blatant lie. So Mon Mothma decides it's time to openly condemn the Emperor, but doing so is a lot harder than one might expect. Just for openly speaking the truth, or at the very least, just for voicing her opinion, Mothma has to plan an entire escape from the Senate. Bail Organa has one escape planned for her, but when Luthen learns that Organa's team is compromised, he assigns Cassian to help with his own escape path. Though Mothma hasn't really trusted Luthen ever since he had her friend Tay Kolma killed, so Mothma plans her speech without really knowing how she's going to get out of there afterwards. But with Organa's help, Mothma takes the floor of the Senate to condemn Palpatine and the Empire's manipulation of the truth, and this scene was absolutely flooring. I mean, considering how much crime and corruption and injustice we see in the real world, it's a shame that we don't see real government officials who have the same kind of conviction as Mothma has here. Where is the opposition to real-world tyranny? I don't know, man, but watching Mothma's speech did make me feel some type of way about today's political atmosphere. Either way, Cassian does manage to extract Mothma after her speech and kills the corrupted agent on Organa's team, along with Mothma's driver Cloris, who was an ISB spy, of course. But once she's safe, the rebellion preps Mothma to give a separate speech, which would be the one that we see her give during Star Wars Rebels. And man, I just loved everything about this sequence. It was tense, it was suspenseful, and it reminded me of how important the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press really is, especially in times where people want to suppress those freedoms. I also like how important Bail Organa was to the story being told here, so I understand why Benjamin Bratt stepped in to play the character in Jimmy Smits' absence. And Benjamin Bratt does a really great job of playing the role of Senator Organa, though it should go without saying that every member of the cast is absolutely excellent here. Back on Yavin, Cassian decides to leave the rebellion and start a new life with Bix, but she leaves in the middle of the night, leaving a video message that tells Cassian that he must stay with the rebellion in order to help them win. And I knew Cassian and Bix would eventually have to part ways. After all, we don't see her appear in any subsequent Star Wars material, but I thought that meant we were going to see her die in this show. And seeing her choose to leave is almost more sad than seeing her die. Because Cassian chose her. He chose love. He chose to live a life with her over living a life as a cog in the war machine, but she chose to leave anyway because she knew Cassian's role in the rebellion was way more important than her love for him. So even though Cassian wanted the freedom to make his own choices, the rebellion's win over the Empire would mean that all people from across the galaxy would be able to have that same freedom. It's just a shame that Cassian won't be able to experience that freedom, since we know what his fate ultimately is in Rogue One. And that makes Bix's decision to leave all the more tragic, since she promised to find Cassian once the rebellion wins the war, because we all know that doesn't end up happening. So yeah, I was an emotional wreck after watching this episode. But I was glad to see that even though Cassian does lose his loving girlfriend, the episode also ends with him gaining a close ally and friend. Because Rebel technicians successfully managed to reprogram the stolen KX droid, meaning that the episode ends with the birth of the sassy K2SO. And I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of shenanigans these two are going to get up to, especially leading up to the events of Rogue One. It's hard to believe that the series is almost over, but we finally come to the end. And I appreciate everyone who stuck around to hear my full thoughts on these episodes, especially given how much there was to discuss. But given how truly awesome and cinematic these episodes felt, Disney should seriously consider releasing these arcs as full-length feature films. The 10-year anniversary of Rogue One is coming up soon after all, so I think that would be absolutely incredible. Either way, I just hope that the final few episodes will end up being just as good as this batch was, but I guess we'll see how the series finale of Andor will actually turn out to be once it gets released on Tuesday.